There's a city in America where the population dropped 11% in a single decade, where the largest employer is the state government, where a Manhattan Institute report concluded that the public pension system alone could push the city into bankruptcy, and where the official press releases still talk about Renaissance. The city is Hartford, Connecticut, and the Renaissance hasn't shown up. Across America, while everyone is watching San Francisco's downtown vacancy rates and arguing about Chicago's politics, dozens of mid-sized cities are quietly going bankrupt in slow motion. Pension systems funded at 50%, tax bases shrinking 1% every year for 30 years straight, public schools losing students faster than they can fire teachers, federal COVID money that propped everything up from 2021 to 2024, now gone. In this countdown, we're exposing 10 American cities quietly collapsing in 2026. Not the cities you've already heard about 1,000 times. Not Detroit, not Cleveland, not Memphis, not Baltimore. The other ones. The cities where the local newspaper still runs upbeat stories about new restaurants opening, while the bond rating slips another notch, the population estimates come in negative again, and the city council quietly votes to cut another 200 positions through attrition. According to a 2025 Pew Charitable Trust's review, at least 20 of the nation's 25 most populous cities are running budget deficits for fiscal year 2026. According to Truth in Accounting, 54 of the 75 most populous U.S. cities don't have enough money to pay their bills. 4 major cities, Chicago, L.A., San Francisco, and Washington, were credit downgraded in a 5-month span between December 2024 and April 2025. And the cities on this list, mostly mid-sized, mostly off the headlines, are sliding even harder. One city on this list has a poverty rate near 29%, the highest concentrated poverty in its state. And another has spent the past 12 years climbing out of bankruptcy and is already sliding back. A third is staring at a record $174 million budget deficit while its mayor talks about progress. Think about it. You've probably driven through one of these cities. You've probably never seen the financial reports. You've probably trusted that things are improving because nobody told you otherwise. Subscribe before your hometown makes the next list. Like the video if you've ever wondered why the school district keeps cutting programs while the property tax keeps climbing. Now you'll know. Let's break it down. Number 10. Springfield, Massachusetts. Where the manufacturing left, the universities stayed, and the budget keeps drifting. There's a city in western Massachusetts where the median household income sits roughly half of the state average, where population has been essentially stagnant for 40 years, and where the school district has been under state oversight or partnership for over a decade. Welcome to Springfield. Springfield was supposed to be the western anchor of Massachusetts, birthplace of basketball, home to Mass Mutual, Smith & Wesson, big universities nearby, including UMass Amherst and Springfield College, a diversified economy on paper, and underneath, a quiet erosion that nobody outside of Central Mass really tracks. The numbers. Springfield's population sits around 153,000, essentially flat from 1980, in a state that has grown roughly 18% over the same period. The city's poverty rate hovers around 26%, more than double the Massachusetts state average of 10%. Springfield has been flagged for chronic underperformance in K-12 education for years, and the school district has operated under various state interventions. Median household income sits around $46,000, roughly half of the Massachusetts statewide median of $96,000. Reddit quote. Springfield is the city Massachusetts forgets exists when they're bragging about Boston. What it's like. Living in Springfield's economy is like dating someone whose family used to be famous and now they're just a Wikipedia page nobody updates. Picture this. You drive through the South End on a Tuesday morning. The downtown has had 3 revitalization plans in 15 years. The MGM Springfield Casino opened in 2018 with promises of economic transformation. The promises landed somewhere between modest and disappointing. The neighborhoods around it are still negotiating with the same set of structural problems they had in 2010. Where it gets uncomfortable, Springfield has had real federal investment, real anchor institutions, and real political attention. None of it has been enough to overcome the deindustrialization that hollowed out the city's middle class starting in the 1970s. Sharp contrast. Springfield and Worcester are both western Massachusetts cities with similar industrial histories. Worcester has rebounded with biotech, tech, and college-driven growth. Springfield has not. Same state, same era, very different trajectories. Springfield isn't failing because Massachusetts ignored it. It's failing because every recovery plan ran into the same wall, an economy that lost its core 50 years ago and hasn't found a real replacement. Number 9. Toledo, Ohio, where the glass capital ran out of polish. There's a city that produced the auto industry's windshields for a century and now produces job listings that pay $14 an hour and a downtown vacancy rate that nobody wants to put on the tourism brochure. Welcome to Toledo. Toledo is a Great Lakes industrial city that built America's car windshields, glass tableware, and a national reputation as the Glass City. Population peaked at 383,000 in 1970. It now sits around 268,000. That's a 30% decline in 55 years. Geez, slow enough that nobody screams about it. Fast enough that the city has lost an entire generation of working-class jobs. The numbers. Toledo's population dropped from 383,000 in 1970 to roughly 268,000 in 2025, a decline of about 30%. The city's poverty rate hovers near 25%. Toledo's school district has lost over 30% of its enrollment in the past 25 years. Median household income sits around $48,000, well below the Ohio state median. The city has been on Ohio's list of fiscal watch categories at various points, with the state monitoring local budgets that don't balance. Reddit quote. Toledo is what the Rust Belt looks like when nobody's making a movie about it. What it's like. Living in Toledo is like dating someone whose family had old money in 1972 and is now selling the silver one piece at a time. Picture this. You walk through downtown Toledo on a Wednesday. A few blocks have been beautifully restored. The Hensville district near the ballpark is genuinely charming. 3 blocks over, half the storefronts are boarded. The auto plants on the periphery still employ thousands, but they don't employ what they used to, and the ones that closed left footprints the size of small cities. Where it gets uncomfortable, Toledo's recovery has been real but partial. Jeep, ProMedica, and the University of Toledo anchor the local economy. But the supply chain manufacturing that once supported tens of thousands of middle-class wage jobs has continued to thin out, and the city's tax base has thinned with it. Sharp contrast. Toledo and Fort Wayne, Indiana, are similar mid-sized Midwestern cities with industrial pasts. Fort Wayne has grown roughly 15% since 1990. Toledo has continued to shrink. The difference is Fort Wayne diversified into healthcare, defense, and insurance early. Toledo stayed tied to glass and auto suppliers longer than the math allowed. Toledo isn't failing because the auto industry left entirely. It's failing because the auto industry stayed just enough to keep the city's leadership from confronting the structural decline, and the structural decline kept happening anyway. Number 8. Stockton, California, where the bankruptcy ended in 2015, and the next one is already loading. There's a city in California's Central Valley that filed for the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history at the time, in 2012, and is now staring at a budget pressure that looks uncomfortably similar to the conditions that triggered the first one. Welcome to Stockton. Stockton is the California city most people only hear about when something bad happens. The 2012 bankruptcy, the annual rankings as one of the most violent cities in California, the basic income experiment, the Central Valley heat, and underneath, a city that has been quietly struggling to maintain basic services for over 20 years. The numbers. Stockton filed for Chapter 9 bankruptcy in June 2012, the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history at the time, with about $700 million in obligations. The city emerged from bankruptcy in 2015 after restructuring debt and modifying retiree healthcare benefits. Stockton's median household income sits around $73,000, but its poverty rate remains near 17%. The city's violent crime rate has been chronically among the highest in California, though Governor Newsom announced state crime task force interventions in late 2025 that have shown improvement in burglary, robbery, and motor vehicle theft year over year. Pension obligations through CalPERS continue to consume a growing share of the general fund, a structural pressure shared by many California cities and the state itself. Reddit quote, Stockton's bankruptcy ended on paper. The conditions that caused it never really left. What it's like. Living in Stockton is like dating someone who survived bankruptcy 13 years ago and is suspiciously casual about their current credit card statements. Picture this. You drive through downtown Stockton on a hot August afternoon. The waterfront has been redeveloped. The arena hosts events. The promenade looks better than it did 15 years ago. And then you drive 6 blocks south. The contrast is immediate. The neighborhoods that didn't get redeveloped after 2012 still look like they didn't get redeveloped. The investment landed where it could land. The structural problems waited. Where it gets uncomfortable, Stockton's bankruptcy didn't solve the underlying drivers. Pension costs through CalPERS continued to climb. The city's tax base remained heavily dependent on a handful of sectors. The CalPERS contribution rates have continued to consume general fund resources at a faster rate than revenue growth. Sharp contrast. Stockton and Modesto are both Central Valley cities with similar profiles. Modesto avoided bankruptcy, made earlier reforms, and now sits in a more stable fiscal position. Stockton went through bankruptcy and is still managing the aftermath. Different decisions, different decades, different headlines today. Stockton isn't failing dramatically. It's failing the way someone fails when they survive a near-death experience and then go right back to the same diet. Number 7. Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the high desert sunsets stayed beautiful and the budget started coughing. There's a city facing an $18 million projected shortfall, a chronic violent crime problem ranking it among the most dangerous mid-sized cities in America, and a population that has essentially stopped growing for the first time in a generation. Welcome to Albuquerque. Albuquerque is the largest city in New Mexico and the economic anchor of one of the most fiscally fragile states in the country. The city has good bones: Sandia Labs, Kirtland Air Force Base, the University of New Mexico, tourism, real estate that's still affordable by Sunbelt standards. And then you read the budget reports, the numbers. Albuquerque adopted a $1.5 billion budget for fiscal 2026 with a roughly 5.6% structural deficit, around $18 million. The city's violent crime rate has consistently ranked it among the most dangerous mid-sized cities in America for the past decade. Albuquerque's population growth has slowed dramatically, with some recent years showing essentially zero net growth. The city's reliance on federal employment, particularly defense and energy, makes it vulnerable to federal workforce changes that have intensified in 2025 and 2026. Public school enrollment has declined, with the Albuquerque public school system one of the largest in the Southwest and facing chronic funding pressure. Reddit quote, "Albuquerque is beautiful in pictures and exhausting in person. What it's like. Living in Albuquerque's economy is like dating someone whose entire dating profile says stable, while you slowly notice they've been at the same job at 47% pay for 10 years. Picture this. You're a young professional in Albuquerque looking at your future. The city has Sandia Labs and Kirtland, federal jobs, real estate is affordable. Then you read the news. A federal hiring freeze is expanding. The state's largest employer category is at risk. Crime stats keep showing up in your insurance quotes. The friend you talked to about moving to Phoenix did move to Phoenix. The friend you talked to about moving to Denver did move to Denver. You start to wonder when you'll be making the same call. Where it gets uncomfortable, Albuquerque's economy is structurally tied to federal employment in ways most cities aren't. Sandia Labs alone employs over 13,000 people. When federal workforce contracts tighten, Albuquerque feels it before most other cities. Combined with violent crime that's been politically intractable for 2 decades, the city faces a slow demographic squeeze. Sharp contrast. Albuquerque and El Paso are both southwestern mid-sized cities with strong federal employment ties. El Paso has continued to grow modestly, with population now exceeding 690,000. Albuquerque has stalled near 562,000. Different fiscal management, different demographic momentum. Albuquerque isn't failing because the desert isn't beautiful. It's failing because the federal anchor is contracting, the violent crime story keeps stalling, and the population growth that used to mask both is no longer arriving. Number 6. Wilmington, Delaware, the corporate headquarters of half the Fortune 500, and a city that can barely fund its own schools. There's a city where 2/3 of the Fortune 500 are technically incorporated, and the actual residents face a 22% poverty rate, a struggling school district, and a state government that ranks 45th in fiscal health nationally. Welcome to Wilmington. Wilmington is the strangest city in America in fiscal terms. On paper, it's home to corporate America, Bank of America Card Services, J.P. Morgan Chase Card Services, DuPont's legacy presence, massive corporate filings that fund the state. In reality, Wilmington is one of the smallest major-name American cities, with a population around 71,000, a per capita income roughly half of the suburbs surrounding it, and chronic municipal stress. The numbers. Wilmington's population sits around 71,000, essentially flat from 1980, in a state where the surrounding Newcastle County has grown. The city's poverty rate hovers around 22%, well above the Delaware state average. Median household income sits around $51,000, roughly 40% below the Newcastle County median. Wilmington's violent crime rate has consistently ranked among the highest per capita rates in the country for cities its size. And while Delaware as a state ranks 45th in TIA's 2025 Financial State of the States report, with an F grade, Wilmington's municipal stress sits beneath that statewide stress. Reddit quote, "Wilmington is what happens when the corporate filings move in and the working class can't afford to stay. What it's like. Living in Wilmington is like dating someone whose business card looks impressive and whose actual checking account is in overdraft. Picture this. You drive through downtown Wilmington at 6 p.m. on a Thursday. The corporate towers are mostly empty. The riverfront has been beautifully redeveloped, and the residential streets just outside it look untouched by 30 years of corporate prosperity that flowed through the city without staying. The school system is fighting for funding. The police department is short-staffed. The corporate executives who fly into Wilmington for board meetings have homes in Greenville or out of state. Where it gets uncomfortable, Wilmington's tax base has been chronically narrow because so much of the corporate money flowing through the city flows out again, into the surrounding suburbs, and out of state entirely. The state of Delaware benefits from corporate franchise fees. Wilmington itself benefits modestly. Sharp contrast. Wilmington and New Haven, Connecticut, are similar small cities with prestigious corporate or institutional anchors. New Haven has Yale. Wilmington has corporate filings. Both struggle with concentrated poverty next to immense wealth. Wilmington's outcomes have been worse, in part because corporate filings don't employ workers the way universities do. Wilmington isn't failing because the corporations are leaving. It's failing because the corporations were never really there in the first place, just their paperwork was. Hey, before we get into the top 5, the cities we're about to cover are the ones running budget gaps that would make a small country file for restructuring. If this list has been useful, hit subscribe, because the next one we're working on is 10 cities where the public pensions are about to run out, and you'll want the names. Like the video if you've watched your hometown's downtown change in ways the local news won't acknowledge. Drop a comment if you live in one of these cities, or used to. Real conversations happen in the comments, and I read them. Now let's keep going. Number 5. Reading, Pennsylvania. The city where the poverty rate has been a federal headline for over a decade, and the response keeps being a press conference. There's a city of about 95,000 people in eastern Pennsylvania where the poverty rate sits around 28.7%, where the median household income is about $44,000, and where the share of extreme poverty neighborhoods is the highest in Pennsylvania. Welcome to Reading. Reading was once one of the most prosperous mid-sized cities in America. The Reading Railroad, the original Reading of Monopoly fame, industrial heart of eastern Pennsylvania, pretzel companies, steel, manufacturing. Then the manufacturing left, and what arrived instead was a poverty rate that put Reading on national lists for the worst kind of reasons. The numbers. Reading's poverty rate sits around 28.7%, among the highest in any U.S. city of its size. The Reading metro area's share of extreme poverty, neighborhoods where at least 40% of residents live below the poverty line, has been the highest in Pennsylvania. Median household income sits around $44,000, roughly 50% below the Pennsylvania state median. The city's school district has chronic budget pressure and has been the subject of multiple state interventions. And the federal government has at various points designated Reading among the poorest large cities in America, a designation the city's leadership has alternately embraced and resented. Reddit, quote, Reading is what happens when the trains stop coming and nobody figures out what comes next. What it's like. Living in Reading is like dating someone whose family had a name in Pennsylvania for 150 years and is now living in a one-bedroom and pretending it's downsizing. Picture this. You walk through downtown Reading on a Friday afternoon. The pagoda on Mont Pen is still there, weird and charming, and a postcard from a different era. The downtown. Blocks below have storefronts, some occupied, many not. The schools are doing what they can with what they have. Pennsylvania's funding formula for public education leans heavily on local property taxes. Reading's local property tax base can't sustain what its students need, and the gap between need and funding has been widening for 30 years. Where it gets uncomfortable, Reading's economic decline has been multi-generational. The manufacturing that supported the middle class started leaving in the 1960s and 1970s. The federal and state programs that arrived to help haven't been enough to reverse the structural pull. Reading is also a microcosm of the Latino population growth in the Northeast, with a majority Latino population and an immigrant story that has reshaped the city's culture and demographics. Sharp contrast. Reading and Lancaster, Pennsylvania, are mid-sized eastern PA cities with similar histories. Lancaster has experienced a substantial revitalization, with downtown rebirth and economic diversification. Reading has not. Same state, same region, very different outcomes. Reading isn't failing because the people don't work hard. It's failing because the structural pull that started 60 years ago never stopped pulling, and nobody has figured out how to anchor what's left. Number 4. Houston, Texas. The fourth largest city in America, and the largest city quietly running out of fiscal runway. There's a city projecting a $174 million budget deficit by mid-2026, exceeding the previous year's record-setting $145 million gap, and where the city controller has openly warned about a credit downgrade. Welcome to Houston. Houston is not the city most people think of when they hear fiscal collapse. The economy is huge. The energy sector is real. The Texas Medical Center is the largest medical complex in the world. Population growth has been steady for decades, and underneath, the city's general fund has been quietly running on one-time money, federal disaster relief, and pandemic aid for years, while pension obligations and overtime spending have outpaced revenue. The numbers. Houston is projecting a $174 million budget deficit for fiscal year ending June 2026, exceeding the prior year's record $145 million gap. The city has spent over $54 million in unbudgeted overtime across police, fire, and other departments in the current fiscal year alone. A 2024 legal settlement provided Houston firefighters with back pay and wage increases, putting additional pressure on the budget. The city controller, Chris Hollins, warned publicly that Houston has been relying on one-time money like pandemic aid and disaster relief to pay for ongoing expenses, and that the city's shrinking reserves risk a credit downgrade. Houston is also under court order to spend roughly $100 million on flood-related street and drainage repairs after multiple severe flooding events. Reddit quote, Houston's budget has been one disaster away from a downgrade for 5 years. What it's like. Living in Houston's fiscal future is like dating someone who makes $300,000 a year, lives like they make $500,000, and has been quietly skipping their savings deposits for 15 months. Picture this. You are a Houston resident watching property tax bills climb. The city is growing, the economy is strong, and every year the city controller's report says some version of the structural gap is widening. The mayor and the firefighters are negotiating overtime and arbitration. The state of Texas has its own budget pressures, including unfunded teacher retirement obligations, and the federal government's disaster relief flow is about to be tested by the next storm. Where it gets uncomfortable, Houston's economy is huge, but its municipal finances have been chronically underfunded for years. Climate-related infrastructure costs, especially flood control after Hurricane Harvey and subsequent flooding events, have created multi-billion-dollar long-term obligations. The pension and overtime pressure on the general fund has accelerated. Sharp contrast. Houston and San Antonio are Texas's two largest non-Dallas cities. San Antonio has consistently maintained tighter fiscal discipline and a stronger reserve position. Houston has not. Same state, very different fiscal trajectories. Houston isn't failing because the energy sector is collapsing. It's failing because the city's growth has been faster than its fiscal discipline, and the bills that piled up during the boom are now arriving in the slowdown. Number 3. Bridgeport, Connecticut, the largest city in Connecticut and one of the most quietly distressed cities in New England. There's a city of about 148,000 with a poverty rate around 19%, a public school system in chronic crisis, and a pension system that, while officially backed by the state, sits on top of municipal obligations the city itself has to fund. Welcome to Bridgeport. Bridgeport is the city Connecticut likes to skip in its own marketing. Hartford is the capital. Stamford is the financial hub. New Haven has Yale. Bridgeport has the largest population, the deepest harbor, and the most chronic structural distress. The numbers. Bridgeport's population sits around 148,000, with very limited growth over the past 50 years. The city's poverty rate hovers near 19%, well above the Connecticut state average. Median household income sits around $54,000, well below the Connecticut state median of around $90,000. Bridgeport participates in Connecticut's municipal employees' retirement system, but the city is responsible for meeting its own pension obligations through its tax base. Bridgeport's downtown has had multiple revitalization plans since the 1970s that have produced incremental progress and immense ongoing structural challenges. Reddit quote: Bridgeport is the largest city in the wealthiest state, and somehow the most overlooked one in the country. What it's like. Living in Bridgeport is like dating someone whose family lives in a mansion 8 miles away and refuses to invite them to dinner. Picture this. You drive from Greenwich to Bridgeport on I-95. You leave behind the Greenwich median home price of $2.4 million. You arrive in a city whose median home price is roughly 1/10 of that. You're 30 minutes apart by car. You're worlds apart in everything else. The school district funding is structurally unequal because it's tied to local property taxes. Infrastructure spending is structurally unequal because the local tax base can't carry the load. The state government has been told for 30 years that this is a problem. The state government has done less than it could. Where it gets uncomfortable, Bridgeport's distress is downstream of one of the most fiscally distressed states in America. Connecticut ranks 49th in TIA's 2025 report. Bridgeport sits beneath that distress, with a tax base that can't grow fast enough to offset the obligations the state pushes down. Sharp contrast. Bridgeport and Stamford are both Fairfield County, Connecticut cities, 16 miles apart. Stamford has thrived as a financial corridor extension of New York. Bridgeport has not. Same county, same state, very different access to capital. Bridgeport isn't failing because Connecticut isn't wealthy. It's failing because Connecticut is wealthy and Bridgeport doesn't share in it, and the state has spent 50 years politely treating that as someone else's problem. Number 2. Oakland, California. The Bay Area city facing the largest budget deficit in its history and the smallest cushion left to absorb it. There's a city where the budget gap is approximately $129 million for the current fiscal year, with another $280 million projected over the next 2 years, and where the school district just approved $102 million in cuts in December 2025. Welcome to Oakland. Oakland is the Bay Area city that lives in San Francisco's shadow and pays its own bills with its own dwindling reserves. The Raiders left. The Warriors left. The A's left. The downtown office vacancy rate is among the highest in the country. Tech jobs that came in during the 2010s have not all stayed through the 2020s, and the city's structural deficit has now exceeded its rainy day funds capacity. The numbers. Oakland faces a $129 million budget gap in fiscal year 2025, with an additional $280 million projected over the next 2 years. The Oakland Unified School District approved $102 million in budget cuts in December 2025, including a $12 million reduction to special education services that has parents raising legal concerns about federal compliance. Oakland is bracing for nearly $25 million in federal funding cuts in 2026, compounding existing budget pressures. The city's general fund pension obligations through CalPERS continue to consume an increasing share of the budget, with no clear path to stabilization without significant tax increases or service cuts. Oakland's interim mayor and incoming mayor Barbara Lee inherit a structural gap that the city has not closed in 5 years. Reddit quote: Oakland's budget situation is what San Francisco's would look like if San Francisco didn't have wealthy people writing checks. What it's like. Living in Oakland's fiscal future is like dating someone who survived 3 different breakups and is currently in the process of breaking up, with all 3 of them again at once. Picture this. You're an Oakland public school parent reading the December 2025 cuts. $102 million. School site budgets reduced by up to 10%. Special education cut. You attend the school board meeting. You hear the same words every district facing this kind of pressure uses. Painful, but necessary. Right-sizing. Strategic alignment. You watch the meeting end. You drive home. You start looking at the school districts in the East Bay suburbs. Where it gets uncomfortable, Oakland's structural deficit isn't a one-year shock. It's the result of California's Proposition 13 capping property taxes since 1978, of voter-approved special taxes that haven't kept up with rising costs, of pension obligations through CalPERS that have grown faster than revenue, and of the loss of federal pandemic aid that propped up city budgets from 2021 to 2023. Sharp contrast. Oakland and Berkeley sit next to each other. Both face budget pressure. Berkeley has a smaller scale, a more concentrated tax base, and a more stable financial position. Oakland has a larger scale and a deeper structural gap. Same Bay Area, very different fiscal floors. Oakland isn't failing because California is failing. It's failing because Oakland inherited 50 years of California fiscal decisions, and the bill has been quietly arriving since 2020. Number 1. Hartford, Connecticut. The state capital of the wealthiest state in America, and one of the most quietly bankrupt mid-sized cities in the country. There's a city where the population dropped 13% in the 1990s, where the city was 30 minutes from filing municipal bankruptcy in 2017 before a state bailout, and where the underlying conditions that triggered that near bankruptcy haven't gone away. Welcome to Hartford. Hartford is the wealthy state's poor city, the capital of Connecticut, home to insurance companies that built the city. His wealth in the 1800s, and, by 2017, a city so structurally broke that the state of Connecticut had to step in with a bailout package to prevent municipal bankruptcy. The bailout went through. The bankruptcy was averted. The structural conditions that caused it remained. The numbers. Hartford's population sits around 121,000, down significantly from its 1950 peak of 177,000. With a 13% decline in the 1990s alone, the largest decline of any town in Connecticut at that time. The city's poverty rate hovers near 27%, ranking it among the poorest large cities in America for over 30 years. Hartford was 30 to 60 days away from filing municipal bankruptcy in 2017, before a state assistance package extended the city's runway. A Manhattan Institute report concluded that Hartford's pension and retiree healthcare obligations alone could push the city into structural bankruptcy without dramatic reform. Roughly half of all property in Hartford is non-taxable, including state government buildings, hospitals, and universities, narrowing the local tax base in ways most cities don't face. Reddit quote, "Hartford is the city that hosts Connecticut's wealth and never gets to keep any of it." What it's like. Living in Hartford is like dating someone who lives on the ground floor of a luxury apartment building, while everyone else lives on the upper floors and never invites them up. Picture this. You walk through downtown Hartford on a Tuesday afternoon. Insurance company headquarters tower over the streets. The Connecticut state capitol sits in plain view. 3 blocks away, you walk through neighborhoods with poverty rates over 40%. You see boarded storefronts and empty lots. The infrastructure tells you the city has been managing decline for 50 years. And then you read the property tax assessments. Hartford has one of the highest mill rates in Connecticut. The residents pay more, the city collects less. The math has been ugly since long before any current resident moved in. Where it gets uncomfortable, Hartford's structural problem is unique. It's a small city, geographically. The wealthy suburbs of West Hartford, Avon, and Glastonbury surround it, but their property tax revenues stay in those towns, not in the city proper. Hartford's tax base has been hollowed out for decades, while its obligations, including pensions for police, fire, teachers, and city workers, have continued to mature on a normal schedule. The state of Connecticut, ranked 49th in TIA's 2025 fiscal report, doesn't have the capacity to bail out Hartford the way it did in 2017. Sharp contrast. Hartford and Providence, Rhode Island, are similar New England state capitals. Providence has had a real renaissance with downtown revival, university expansion, and population growth. Hartford has not. Same region, same era, different outcomes. Hartford isn't failing because of any one decision. It's failing because the state of Connecticut spent 50 years pulling its wealthy economy into the suburbs, leaving the capital city as a shell that hosts the government, the insurance towers, and the poverty that pays for all of it. So there it is. 10 American cities quietly collapsing, on the public record, in audited financial reports almost nobody outside City Hall ever reads. Cities where the official talking points celebrate revitalization and the actual books show pension holes that nobody is going to climb out of. Cities where federal pandemic money masked structural rot for 4 years and is now mostly gone. Cities where credit downgrades are showing up not as a one-time shock, but as a slow drumbeat through 2025 and 2026. The cities thriving in 2026, places like Plano, Texas, Carmel, Indiana, and Naperville, Illinois, are not winning because they're trendy. They're winning because they kept their tax bases intact, funded their pensions on schedule, and resisted the structural decisions that hollow out municipal balance sheets over time. The 10 cities on this list took the opposite path. Underfund the pensions, push the costs onto the next mayor, borrow against future federal aid, trust the suburbs to subsidize the city until the suburbs got their own problems. The good news, you can know this. The Pew Charitable Trusts publishes free analysis. Truth in Accounting publishes free analysis. Your city's annual financial report is publicly available. Most people never read them. Most people trust the press releases and stop there. The reason these cities are quietly collapsing is because the collapse is quiet. And it's quiet because almost nobody is watching. If this list helped, share it with the friend who keeps insisting their city is doing fine. Hit subscribe, because next, we're breaking down 10 cities where the public pensions are about to run out, and you'll want to see if your city is on it. Drop a comment if you live in one of these 10 or moved away from one. And remember, the worst urban crisis isn't the loud one. It's the one that gets called improving until the day the bondholders stop returning calls.